My arrogant husband swore I needed him to survive. He looked me straight in the eyes and said I wouldn't last a single week without his name, his money, or the roof he had paid for. I remember the cold weight of the house key in my palm more clearly than I remember my own heartbeat. "Walk away if you dare," he said, smiling while everyone else at the table watched in silence. His mother lowered her wine glass with a satisfied grin. His sister laughed under her breath. His father never looked at me at all. I placed the key beside my wedding ring without saying a word. Less than 24 hours later, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neither would his father's. Neither would the bank's. None of them realized they had just pushed the only person who truly understood the foundation beneath their perfect empire out the front door. If this story speaks to your heart, I'd truly appreciate it if you gently tap the like button and subscribe, but only if this journey genuinely resonates with you. I'd also love to know where you're listening from today. Tell me your city, your country, and even your local time. Reading your comments always reminds me that stories like this travel farther than we ever imagine. Stay with me until the very end because the real lesson I learned wasn't about money. It was about discovering the difference between being needed and being used. And now, let me tell you where it all began. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until one unforgettable Thursday evening in Dallas, Texas, I believed that keeping a family together always required sacrificing pieces of yourself. I was wrong. That dinner changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and my own worth. The Bennett family home sat on nearly 3 acres in Preston Hollow, surrounded by old oak trees whose branches stretched over the driveway like silent witnesses. I had helped choose that house years earlier, although no one ever remembered that part. Inside, the dining room glowed beneath an antique crystal chandelier. Fine china rested on polished walnut. Fresh rosemary drifted from the roast Linda had spent all afternoon preparing. Everything looked warm, everything looked expensive, everything looked like the kind of family people admired from the outside. Ryan raised his glass. "To another successful quarter," he announced. Olivia clapped first. "You keep proving everyone wrong, little brother." Linda smiled proudly. "Your father always knew you were born to lead." Richard simply nodded once before cutting another piece of steak. Then Ryan turned toward me. "Emily," he said casually, "why don't you tell everyone what you've been working on lately?" For a second, I actually smiled. I thought he was finally giving me space to speak. "I've been updating the routing platform and rebuilding the freight optimization model," I answered quietly. "It should reduce fuel costs across." Ryan chuckled before I could finish. "See?" he interrupted. "That's Emily. Always talking about spreadsheets." Olivia laughed openly this time. "She makes it sound like she's running NASA." Linda added, "Honey, those little office projects aren't the same as building a real company." My smile faded. I glanced toward Richard, hoping he might say something, anything. He reached for his water without lifting his eyes. Ryan leaned back comfortably in his chair. "Let's be honest," he said. "If Emily had to make it on her own, she'd be back asking for help before next Friday." Olivia smirked. "That's generous. I was thinking Monday." They laughed together. Not loudly. Not cruelly in the obvious way people imagine cruelty. It was softer than that. Familiar. Practiced. The kind of laughter built from years of someone becoming invisible one conversation at a time. Ryan looked directly at me. "You know I'm right." I felt every pair of eyes settle onto my face. My throat tightened, but I refused to let them see tears. "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Of course." He reached into his pocket and placed a polished silver key on the table between us. The house. He tapped it once with his finger. My house. My mortgage. My name. The room became strangely quiet. "Walk away if you dare," he continued. "You won't survive 1 week without me." Time seemed to slow. Somewhere outside, wind brushed against the windows. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked once, then again. I looked at the key, then at my wedding ring, then at the faces surrounding me. None of them looked uncertain. None of them believed I had a choice. I slipped my ring from my finger, set it gently beside the key. The sound was almost too small to hear. "Then let's find out," I said. I stood, picked up the old leather laptop bag I had carried into that house thousands of times. Nothing else. No suitcase, no jewelry, no argument. Ryan called after me. "You'll be back." I paused only long enough to answer without turning around. Maybe one day you'll understand what actually walked out that door tonight. The front door closed behind me with a quiet click. The Texas air felt cooler than it should have for late September. I walked to the sidewalk beneath the streetlights without knowing exactly where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay where I had spent years shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's story. I believed the hardest part was over. I had no idea that before the next sunset, strange phone calls would begin echoing through the Bennett family, or that hidden beneath years of silence was a truth none of them had ever bothered to see. I spent that first night in a modest extended-stay hotel just outside Austin, staring at a ceiling stained by years of leaking air conditioners and forgotten repairs. The room smelled faintly of fresh detergent mixed with old carpet, and for the first time in 8 years, there was no one waiting to tell me what I should do next. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt unfamiliar. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop still inside its worn leather bag. I did not even have the strength to unzip it. My phone remained face down beside me. It vibrated twice before midnight. I never looked. Some people believe the hardest part of leaving is walking out the front door. They are wrong. The hardest part begins after the door closes, when nobody is telling you who you are anymore, and you have to decide whether you ever believed them in the first place. I did not become invisible overnight. That happened one small moment at a time. Long before I married Ryan, I had already learned how to disappear. My father left our apartment in Austin when I was 12 years old. He packed 2 duffel bags, kissed my forehead, promised he would call every weekend, and drove away in an old blue pickup truck. I waited by the living room window every Saturday for almost 6 months, before my mother gently closed the curtains one afternoon and whispered, "Emily, sometimes grown-ups make promises they were never strong enough to keep." She never spoke badly about him. She simply worked harder. She picked up overnight nursing shifts at Street, David's medical center, slept 4 hours at a time, and somehow still remembered every school concert and every parent conference. Watching her carry everything alone planted 2 beliefs inside me. The first was that love meant sacrifice. The second was that if someone stayed, you owed them everything. Looking back now, those 2 beliefs shaped every decision I made. Ryan entered my life during my final year at the University of Texas. He was confident, charming, and impossibly certain about his future. "My family owns a logistics company," he told me over coffee one rainy afternoon. "One day I will run it." Then he smiled. "You think about problems differently." I like that. Nobody had ever said that to me before. When we married, I believed we were building something together. During those early years, I worked beside him every day. I learned every warehouse, every shipping lane, every customer complaint, every delayed truck, every software bug that slowed deliveries across Texas. I stayed after everyone else left. Sometimes I slept on the office couch during major system upgrades. Ryan would walk into the conference room the next morning carrying coffee and grin. "Still here?" I would laugh. "Somebody has to fix what broke overnight." He would kiss my forehead and answer, "That is why I keep you around." Back then, I thought it was affection. I did not realize how often jokes become habits. Habits become expectations. Expectations become identities. The first time I noticed something changing was during a board presentation about 18 months into our marriage. I had spent nearly 6 weeks redesigning the freight scheduling model after fuel prices surged across the Southwest. The system reduced empty return miles by almost 20%. It saved the company millions during the following year. The presentation began with applause. Ryan stood in front of the screen while I remained near the back wall. Richard shook his son's hand proudly. "Excellent work," he said. Ryan accepted every compliment without hesitation. I waited for him to mention my name. He never did. After everyone left, I asked quietly, "You forgot to tell them I built the model." Ryan slipped his laptop into his briefcase without looking at me. It was not the right moment. There never seems to be a right moment. He sighed as though I had become another problem waiting on his desk. "Emily, executives need one face to associate with leadership. It keeps things simple. Simple for who?" He smiled patiently, almost like a teacher correcting a child. "People remember the captain, not every person below deck." I remember driving home in silence that evening. I remember convincing myself he probably had a point. I remember apologizing first. That became another habit. Years passed that way. Every achievement quietly moved farther away from me. Every success belonged to someone else before the applause even started. At family gatherings, Linda introduced me as Ryan's wonderful support system. Olivia joked that I probably knew where every paperclip in the office was stored. Everyone laughed. I laughed too because challenging those comments always made the room uncomfortable. One Christmas, Richard handed Ryan an engraved watch in front of the entire family. "For carrying this company into the future," he said proudly. I had spent Christmas Eve fixing a routing failure that would have stranded hundreds of freight shipments across 3 states. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Ryan caught my eye across the room afterward. "Do not look like that," he whispered while everyone admired the watch. Recognition is overrated. Maybe for him it was. For me, it slowly became proof that I no longer existed inside my own life. Somewhere along the way, I stopped introducing new ideas during meetings unless Ryan asked first. I stopped correcting people when they credited him for work I had done. I stopped expecting fairness because disappointment was exhausting. My mother noticed before I did. One Sunday afternoon, she folded laundry while I sat beside her kitchen table drinking coffee. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "When you were little," she said softly, "you used to walk into every room believing you belonged there." I smiled faintly. "People grow up." She shook her head. "No. Sometimes they simply spend too much time around people who benefit from making them feel smaller." I changed the subject. I did not want to hear it, because accepting she was right would have forced me to admit something I was not ready to face. As I sat alone in that hotel room years later, her words returned with painful clarity. My phone vibrated again. Then once more. This time I finally turned it over. The screen showed 3 missed calls. None of them came from Ryan. All 3 came from the main office at Bennett Freight. Before I could decide whether to answer, another call appeared. It was not a number I recognized. It was the direct line from the company's operations center. And for the first time since I had walked away, I realized something unusual had already begun. The unfamiliar number rang 3 more times before I finally answered. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the hotel bed, watching the pale morning light creep through the thin curtains. "Emily?" a strained voice asked. "This is Aaron from operations." I recognized him immediately. Aaron had supervised overnight dispatch for almost 6 years. He never called unless something truly mattered. "What happened?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background. "Computer alerts. Someone giving rapid instructions across the room. We cannot access the optimization dashboard," he said. "The routing engine is rejecting every manual override." I closed my eyes. "Has Ryan called the software vendor?" "He keeps saying they can reset everything." Aaron hesitated. "They cannot." I said nothing. "Emily, did you build something none of us knew about?" His question settled over me with surprising weight, not because it was difficult to answer, because nobody had ever asked me before. "Aaron," I replied softly, "I built exactly what the company asked me to build." He lowered his voice. "Then why does nobody here understand how it works without you?" Before I could answer, the line suddenly disconnected. I stared at the silent screen in my hand. Less than 10 minutes later, another call appeared. This one came from Ryan. I let it ring until voicemail answered. A text message arrived almost immediately. "Call me." Another followed. "This is not funny." Then another. "You need to tell them the passwords." I almost smiled, not out of satisfaction, but because he still believed this was about passwords. He still believed every problem could be solved if someone simply obeyed him. The truth was much larger than that. The routing platform had never depended on hidden codes. It depended on years of decisions, thousands of small adjustments, customer patterns, fuel fluctuations, weather histories, maintenance schedules, seasonal demand, and predictive models that evolved because someone watched them every single day. Software does not become intelligent by accident, neither do companies. Around noon, I finally opened my laptop. Hundreds of unread emails filled the screen. Most were automated reports. Others were routine notifications I no longer needed. Then one subject line froze me in place. Confidential transition documents. The sender was Ryan. The message had accidentally synchronized before my company account had been disabled. My heartbeat slowed. I opened the attachment. The first document was a draft separation agreement prepared nearly 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. Long before our dinner. Long before he placed that house key on the table. Long before he challenged me to leave. My eyes moved slowly across each page. The legal language was polished. Clinical. Detached. The proposal divided property. Retirement accounts. Investment portfolios. Then I reached a paragraph that made my hands go cold. All intellectual property developed during employment shall remain the exclusive property of Bennett Freight Group under executive authority previously acknowledged by Ryan Bennett. Executive authority. I read the sentence again, then a third time. Every framework I had designed, every logistics model, every predictive algorithm, every internal planning system. They were already preparing to transfer complete ownership without even speaking to me first. I kept scrolling. Another attachment appeared beneath the first. Internal executive memo. It had been sent only to Ryan and Olivia. My name appeared halfway through the page. Emily has limited strategic involvement and primarily provides administrative support to operational leadership. I stared at the words until they blurred. Administrative support. 8 years compressed into 3 words. 8 years of 18-hour workdays. 8 years of solving problems no one else even recognized. 8 years of quietly carrying responsibilities that never appeared beside my name. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Olivia. I answered before I could change my mind. "You finally picked up," she said sharply. "Ryan needs access to your documentation." "My documentation? Everything belongs to the company." I remained silent. She continued. "Do not make this more difficult than it has to be." "Did you know?" I asked. "Know what?" "That he prepared divorce paperwork weeks ago." Silence. Only for a second. But it was enough. "That is not what this call is about," she answered carefully. "No," I whispered. "It never is." Her voice hardened. "Listen to me. Whatever you think you contributed, Ryan built this business. Everyone knows that." "Does everyone?" I asked. She sighed impatiently. "Emily, nobody is interested in revisiting history." "History?" I repeated. "You mean the years I spent building systems while everyone else accepted applause?" "You are being emotional." I almost laughed. Those 4 words had followed me through nearly every disagreement of my marriage. Emotional, sensitive, dramatic, difficult. Labels are convenient. They allow people to ignore evidence. "Goodbye, Olivia," I said calmly. "Emily." I ended the call. For several long minutes I simply sat there. Outside my window a delivery truck backed into a loading dock across the street. Its reverse alarm echoed through the parking lot. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people beginning another workday. Meanwhile, my entire life was rearranging itself one document at a time. I reopened the email. Hidden beneath the legal files was one final attachment I had almost overlooked. It was an archived message forwarded months earlier. Ryan had written directly to Richard. "Emily enjoys helping the team, but she does not really understand executive strategy. I handle all major operational decisions myself." Richard had answered only 2 words. "Proud of you." I leaned back slowly. That was the moment everything finally aligned. This had never been about one humiliating dinner. It had never been about one cruel remark. It had been a carefully maintained story repeated so consistently that even the people closest to us accepted it as truth. They had not merely underestimated me. They had rewritten me. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. I frowned. Nobody knew where I was staying except my mother. The knock came again. Slow. Deliberate. I walked carefully toward the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway with a weathered leather briefcase and a tired expression was a man I had trusted for years. Marcus Hale, the company's chief operating officer. He looked older than he had only 2 days before. When our eyes met through the narrow opening, he spoke only one sentence. "Emily," he said softly, "there is something Richard has never been allowed to see." Marcus stood quietly outside my hotel room, holding a weathered brown leather briefcase that looked almost as old as his 32 years with Bennett Freight. He had always been the calmest person in every crisis I had ever witnessed. While everyone else raised their voices, Marcus lowered his. While executives searched for someone to blame, Marcus searched for facts. Seeing him standing there instead of sitting inside the operations center told me this was no ordinary visit. I unlocked the door and stepped aside. "Come in." He nodded once before entering. His eyes slowly scanned the small room. A single bed, one suitcase. My laptop resting unopened on the desk beside an untouched cup of coffee that had already gone cold. He looked at me with quiet sadness. "I never imagined I would find you here." I managed a faint smile. Neither did I. He placed the briefcase carefully on the table but did not open it immediately. Instead, he removed his glasses, folded them with deliberate care, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. "Richard does not know who built his company anymore." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I mean exactly what I said." He sat across from me. "Emily, I have worked for Richard Bennett since before Ryan graduated from high school. I watched that company survive recessions, fuel shortages, hurricanes, and the supply chain collapse during the pandemic. I have seen hundreds of talented people come and go." He paused before continuing. "You are the only person I have ever met who could walk into complete operational chaos and somehow make everyone breathe again." I looked down at my hands. Compliments had become so unfamiliar that I almost did not know what to do with them. Marcus continued. "Do you remember the winter storm 3 years ago?" I nodded immediately. Half the highways across North Texas had closed. Hundreds of trailers were stranded. Customers threatened lawsuits. Drivers were sleeping inside their cabs waiting for roads to reopen. "Richard still believes Ryan coordinated that recovery," Marcus said quietly. I looked up. "He did not?" Marcus gave me a tired smile. "Ryan was in Aspen that week attending an investor retreat." I stared at him. "Richard never knew." "No." Marcus opened the briefcase and carefully removed several thick binders, each covered with colored tabs and handwritten notes. Then he laid a laptop beside them. "I brought these because I think you deserve to know something." He powered on the computer. The screen filled with archived version histories from the company's internal engineering platform. Hundreds of updates stretched back nearly 8 years. Every major operational milestone carried one name beside it. "Emily Carter." Marcus pointed silently at the display. "Every optimization model." Another click. "Every dispatch automation." Another click. "Every predictive freight algorithm." Another click. "Every emergency recovery protocol." My own name continued appearing again and again across thousands of records I had almost forgotten existed. "Nobody can rewrite metadata," Marcus said softly. "Computers remember what people choose to forget." I felt something tighten inside my chest. It was not anger anymore. It was grief. Grief for the version of myself that had worked so hard believing effort would eventually speak louder than ego. Marcus opened another folder. Inside were printed emails dating back years. "Read this one." It was from Richard after a difficult quarterly meeting. "Outstanding recovery strategy. Tell Ryan I am proud of him." Marcus shook his head slowly. "The attached presentation had your name on every draft until the night before the meeting." He slid another document across the table. I looked down. Revision history. Final editor, Ryan Bennett. Author credit updated. Presenter changed. I closed my eyes. He erased my name. Marcus nodded. "Not once." Another folder opened. Not twice. Another stack of papers appeared. Dozens of times. The room became impossibly quiet. Outside, a freight train sounded somewhere in the distance, its long whistle carrying across the city. Marcus leaned back. "I should have spoken years ago." I looked at him. "Why did you not?" He did not answer immediately. "Because I believed Ryan would eventually become the leader his father hoped he would become." His voice grew softer. "Instead, he became someone who believed recognition was something you could steal instead of something you earned." I looked toward the window. "Richard trusted him." "Yes. And you?" Marcus smiled sadly. "I trusted both of you." Another silence settled between us before he finally reached into the bottom of the briefcase and removed one last envelope. Unlike the others, it carried Richard's handwriting across the front. It had never been opened. "What is this?" I asked. 5 years ago, Richard wanted to establish an innovation award inside the company. Marcus placed the envelope in front of me. He asked department heads to nominate the employee who had transformed Bennett Freight more than anyone else. My heart began beating faster. Who did they nominate? Marcus looked directly into my eyes. Every department submitted your name. I froze. Every single one? Warehouse management, dispatch, engineering, customer service, fleet operations, human resources, every division. I swallowed hard. Then why did nothing happen? Marcus lowered his eyes. Ryan intercepted the recommendations before Richard ever saw them. My throat tightened. He told his father the departments misunderstood the instructions. Marcus nodded once. Richard believed him. My hands rested on the sealed envelope for several seconds without moving. Finally, I asked, almost in a whisper, "Why are you showing me this now?" Marcus answered with absolute certainty. Because less than 24 hours after you left, the operations center began collapsing one decision at a time. People are finally asking questions nobody dared ask before. His phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed immediately. He answered without taking his eyes off me. Marcus speaking. He listened quietly for nearly 30 seconds. Understood. Do not touch anything. I will call you back. He ended the call and slowly slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. What happened? I asked. Marcus stood. His voice was calm, but I had worked beside him long enough to recognize genuine concern beneath that calm. Richard just ordered a complete audit of every operational system inside Bennett Freight. He paused before adding the words that changed everything. And he specifically asked one question that nobody in that building was prepared to answer. He asked, "Who actually built all of this?" Marcus left just before sunset, taking the empty coffee cup with him as though cleaning up after difficult conversations had become another one of his quiet habits. The hotel room felt different after he walked out. Smaller somehow. The unopened envelope Richard had never seen remained on the table beside my laptop. I did not touch it for almost an hour. I simply watched the fading light crawl across the carpet until the room turned the color of old photographs. There are moments in life when the truth does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like a whisper you have been refusing to hear for years. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "Honey," she said the moment I answered, "are you safe?" "Yes." "Have you eaten?" I smiled, despite everything. "Not yet." "Then order something before you try to solve the entire world." She paused. "You always forget to eat when you start carrying everyone else's problems." Her words lingered after we hung up. She still saw the daughter who believed every burden belonged on her shoulders. Maybe she always would. I finally slid the envelope closer. Richard's handwriting covered the front in blue ink. Innovation Award recommendation. It had never been opened. I carefully unfolded the papers inside. The first page contained signatures from department managers across the company. Warehouse operations, fleet maintenance, dispatch control, information systems, customer relations, human resources. Every manager had written the same recommendation in different words. Emily Carter consistently develops solutions that improve every department she touches. Emily Carter should lead the company's long-term innovation strategy. Emily Carter has become the operational backbone of Bennett Freight. I kept reading. One manager had added a handwritten note beneath his signature. "She never asks for credit. That is exactly why she deserves it." My eyes blurred for a moment. I remembered every one of those people. I remembered staying late to help dispatch supervisors during snowstorms, sitting beside mechanics while we redesigned maintenance schedules, bringing pizza to programmers during overnight software launches. None of it had ever felt extraordinary to me. It was simply the work that needed to be done. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door, expecting housekeeping. Instead, I found a young hotel employee holding a small package. "Miss Carter?" "Yes. This was left for you at the front desk about 20 minutes ago." He handed me a plain cardboard box before leaving. Inside was a portable hard drive and a folded note written in Marcus's careful handwriting. "You should keep copies somewhere they cannot disappear." My pulse quickened. I connected the drive to my laptop. Thousands of archived files appeared across the screen. Design journals, development logs, engineering notes, video recordings of internal demonstrations. One folder caught my attention immediately. Early prototype sessions. I clicked. A recording opened from almost 7 years earlier. There I was, standing inside a conference room, wearing a navy blazer I had almost forgotten I owned. Whiteboards covered every wall behind me. Ryan sat near the back scrolling through his phone while I explained a predictive routing model to department heads. If we combine weather forecasting with historical delivery delays, the younger version of me said confidently, we can reduce idle fleet hours without purchasing a single new truck. Questions filled the room. I answered every one of them. Ryan barely spoke. When the recording ended, I remained frozen in my chair. I had forgotten that woman. Not because she lacked ability, because over time she had been encouraged to become quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. Another folder contained emails from customers. One message came from the chief logistics officer of a national retail chain. Emily, your solution saved our holiday distribution network. Please accept our gratitude. Another came from a manufacturing company in Oklahoma. Your recommendations prevented what could have become a multi-million-dollar disruption. Thank you for answering my call at 2 a.m. I leaned back slowly. For years, I had measured my worth through the opinions of people who never bothered to see me clearly. Yet strangers whose businesses I had quietly helped remembered my name without hesitation. The realization settled over me with surprising gentleness. Perhaps I had never been invisible. Perhaps I had simply been standing in the wrong room. My thoughts were interrupted by another incoming call. This time the screen displayed Richard Bennett. I stared at his name for several rings before answering. Emily. His voice sounded older than I remembered. More careful. Thank you for taking my call. What can I do for you? A long silence followed. Marcus brought me some records today. I waited. I did not realize how much you were involved. The sentence felt painfully incomplete, as though he had not yet found the courage to say what he truly meant. There were many things you did not realize, I replied softly. He did not argue. Would you be willing to meet with me? He asked. Not today. Another pause. I understand. Before ending the call, he quietly added, there are questions I should have asked years ago. After the line disconnected, I looked once more at the folders filling my computer screen. Piece by piece, another version of my life was returning to me. Not the version shaped by introductions at family dinners or board meetings. The version built through thousands of ordinary mornings when nobody was watching. The version that solved impossible problems because giving up had never crossed her mind. Yet even with everything Marcus had given me, I knew there was still something missing. These files proved what I had built. They did not explain why certain decisions had been hidden so carefully. They did not explain what Ryan had been protecting. As I organized the documents into new folders, a notification suddenly appeared in the corner of my screen. An archived executive calendar had synchronized from the old company server. One meeting scheduled nearly 4 years earlier carried only 3 names. Richard Bennett, Ryan Bennett, outside counsel. Beneath the title was a single attachment marked confidential. The attachment had never been opened. The notification remained on my screen long after midnight. I stared at the confidential calendar entry without opening the attachment. Part of me already understood that every answer would ask something of me in return. Truth always does. Outside, rain had started falling across Austin, tapping softly against the hotel window. It reminded me that storms rarely arrive all at once. They gather quietly until the sky can no longer hold them. The following morning, my phone rang before sunrise. Marcus. I answered immediately. Good morning, I said. I wish it were, he replied. His voice sounded calm, but beneath that calm I heard exhaustion. Richard ordered the audit to begin at 6 this morning. Every department has been pulling archived files. How is Ryan handling it? Marcus let out a slow breath. Exactly the way people do when they mistake confidence for control. I remained silent. He says the audit is unnecessary. He says the systems are failing because people are overreacting. He says everyone simply needs to trust him. Do they? I asked. Marcus paused. Not the way they did yesterday. After we ended the call, I finally opened the confidential attachment. Inside was a legal memorandum prepared years earlier by outside corporate counsel. It outlined recommendations for protecting proprietary operational systems and identifying their original creators. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Original authorship shall be documented to preserve future intellectual property rights and executive accountability. Attached beneath the memorandum was an unsigned draft listing primary system architect. My own name appeared there. It had never been finalized. Someone had stopped the process before it reached completion. I quietly closed the file. Suddenly, dozens of small moments from the past began fitting together. Meetings that had been postponed without explanation. Documents that had disappeared before board reviews. Conversations Ryan insisted I did not need to attend. None of those moments had been accidents. They had been decisions. My phone vibrated again. This time, the caller identification displayed Richard Bennett. I answered after a long pause. "Emily," he said carefully, "would you be willing to answer one question?" "I can try. Did you create the operational forecasting system currently running our logistics network?" I looked out the window before answering. "Yes." Another silence. Then he asked, almost reluctantly, "Did Ryan?" "No." Richard did not speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice carried none of the certainty I had associated with him for years. "Thank you for telling me the truth." "I have only ever told the truth," I answered gently. "It simply was not the version anyone wanted to hear." He whispered something that sounded almost like regret before ending the call. Hours later, Marcus called again. This time there was movement behind his voice. Doors opening, phones ringing, conversations overlapping. "The board is here," he said. "Already? Emergency session." "What happened?" Marcus lowered his voice. "Several major clients asked why the predictive scheduling report stopped updating yesterday. Nobody in the executive office could explain how the platform actually works." I closed my eyes. "And Ryan?" "He insisted information technology restore everything manually." "They cannot." They told him exactly that. Marcus paused. He became angry. "At who?" "Everyone." That answer saddened me more than it surprised me. There are people who become curious when reality challenges their assumptions. Then there are people who become louder. Ryan had always believed volume could replace understanding. Around noon, another number appeared on my phone. "Olivia," I answered. "Emily," she began quickly. "This has gone far enough." "Has it?" "People are making ridiculous claims about your role. People are reading records." She ignored the comment. "You know Ryan built this company." I replied quietly. "Then the audit should confirm that." Her breathing grew heavier. "You are trying to embarrass this family." "No," I answered with complete honesty. I left. "Then why is all of this happening?" "Because facts do not disappear simply because I walked away." She had no immediate response. Finally she said, "You could stop this." "Stop what?" "Everyone questioning Ryan." I looked toward the laptop displaying years of archived work carrying my name. "Olivia," I said softly, "I did not ask anyone to question him. They simply began asking how things worked after I was gone." She ended the call without another word. That afternoon, Marcus sent me a photograph. It showed the executive conference room inside Bennett Freight. Whiteboards covered with process maps, senior managers sitting quietly around the table, Richard standing near the front of the room, Ryan speaking with animated gestures. Nobody appeared convinced. A second photograph followed moments later. The projection screen displayed system architecture diagrams. At the bottom of every page appeared the same line, "Lead design author, Emily Carter." I stared at the image for a long time. Not because I felt victorious. I did not. I felt strangely peaceful. For years I believed justice required dramatic confrontations, raised voices, perfect speeches, public humiliation. Instead, justice had begun with something much simpler: records, dates, evidence, honest questions. Nobody needed me to shout. Nobody needed me to accuse anyone. The truth was finally doing what truth eventually does when people become willing to see it. It stood quietly in the middle of the room, asking everyone the same uncomfortable question. What if the story you believed was never the whole story? That evening, Marcus called one final time. His voice was softer than before. "Richard asked me to tell you something." "What is it?" Marcus hesitated. He said, "Tell Emily, I finally understand why the company always seemed strongest when she was in the building." I closed my eyes. Not because those words erased the past. They could not, but because they proved something I had almost forgotten. Recognition that arrives late cannot return lost years, yet it can change the future. Before we ended the call, Marcus added one final sentence. Emily, tomorrow the board is bringing in outside intellectual property counsel. Why? I asked quietly. His answer came almost as a whisper. Because they have started wondering whether the company legally owns everything they thought it owned. The next morning arrived with an unexpected kind of silence. Not the peaceful silence of problems disappearing, but the uneasy silence that settles over people after certainty begins to crack. I made coffee in the tiny hotel kitchenette and opened my laptop. For the first time in days, there were no missed calls waiting from inside Bennett Freight. Instead, there were news alerts from the logistics industry. One headline caught my attention immediately. Bennett Freight delays spark questions from regional clients. I read only the first few lines before closing the article. I did not need headlines to tell me what was happening. I already knew how fragile confidence becomes when the people responsible for a system no longer understand the system itself. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus called again. He sounded as though he had not slept. "You would not believe this board meeting," he said. "Try me." He let out a tired laugh. Ryan walked in insisting everyone needed to stop overreacting. He blamed information technology. Then he blamed operations. Then he blamed outside consultants. When nobody accepted those explanations, he blamed me. "And what did you say?" "Nothing at first." Marcus paused. Richard asked me one question. He said, "Marcus, did Emily really create these systems?" I waited quietly. I answered yes. The single word seemed to carry years of unspoken truth. "What happened then?" I asked. Ryan interrupted before anyone else could speak. Marcus lowered his voice as though he could still hear the argument echoing through the conference room. "He said you were exaggerating your contributions. He insisted every executive collaborates and nobody deserves individual credit." I smiled sadly. "That is interesting." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Because for years he accepted individual credit without mentioning collaboration." Marcus was silent for a moment before saying, Richard noticed the contradiction immediately. I imagined the room, the long walnut conference table, the framed photographs celebrating decades of company milestones. Ryan standing at the front, trying to hold together a story that had begun falling apart. Not because someone attacked it, but because evidence quietly refused to support it anymore. Marcus continued. Then Olivia spoke. What did she say? She tried defending Ryan. She argued that leadership matters more than technical work. And? The outside counsel asked a very simple question. I leaned forward. What question? Marcus answered slowly. Who authored the systems before they were presented to the board? Another pause followed. Nobody answered. I looked out the window at traffic moving steadily along the highway. There was something almost comforting about ordinary people continuing with ordinary lives while another chapter quietly closed behind me. Emily, Marcus said softly, they have stopped arguing about whether you mattered. What are they arguing about now? They are arguing about how they never realized it. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Around lunchtime, my phone lit up with Ryan's name. For several seconds, I simply watched it ring. Eventually, I answered, Hello. He did not greet me. You are enjoying this. His voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. Enjoying what? Everybody questioning me. I have not questioned you. Do not play games. I remained calm. Ryan, I have not attended a single meeting. I have not spoken to your board. I have not contacted your clients. Then why is everyone suddenly acting like you were the only person doing anything? I answered honestly, because they finally started asking the people who actually knew. His breathing became heavier. Marcus turned them against me. Marcus answered questions. Richard is overreacting. Richard is reading documents. There was another long silence. Then Ryan said something that revealed more than he intended. You could fix all of this. How? Come back. Tell them we built everything together. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Once, hearing those words might have sounded like reconciliation. Now they sounded like fear. Ryan, I said quietly, if that had been true, I would say it. You owe this family. I gave this family 8 years. That is not enough. His answer surprised even him. I heard it the instant the words left his mouth. He had spoken without thinking. For years I probably would have apologized. This time I simply replied, nothing was ever going to be enough, was it? He did not answer. The call ended a few seconds later. That afternoon, Marcus sent another message. This time it was not about systems or software, it was about people. Olivia had left the executive meeting halfway through, after arguing with Ryan over missing documentation. The chief financial officer refused to approve new spending without complete operational records. Two senior managers openly disagreed with Ryan during the same meeting. One even said, "We should have listened to Emily years ago." Marcus added only one sentence beneath the update: "They have started blaming each other." I set my phone aside and walked outside for the first time that day. The rain had cleared. Warm Texas sunlight reflected off office buildings across the street. People hurried past carrying briefcases, coffee cups, backpacks, and grocery bags. None of them knew my story. None of them knew the strange mixture of sadness and relief filling my heart. I did not feel victorious. Watching people unravel is never satisfying when you once loved them. What I felt instead was distance, the kind that allows you to see patterns you could never recognize while standing inside them. Ryan was not losing because I fought him. He was losing because the version of reality he had spent years protecting required everyone else to remain silent forever. The moment people began asking honest questions, that version could no longer survive. Late that evening, Marcus called one last time. "Richard stayed after everyone left," he said. "He sat alone in the conference room for nearly an hour. Did he say anything?" "Only this." Marcus paused before repeating Richard's words exactly. "I spent years believing my company was built on loyalty. I never realized it had been surviving on someone else's quiet sacrifice." I looked toward the fading sunset outside my window. Before I could respond, Marcus added one final piece of news. "Emily, tomorrow morning an investment group from New York is coming to review the company's future, but they are not asking to meet Ryan first." The phone stopped ringing as often after that week, not because the questions had been answered, but because they no longer belonged to me. For the first time in years, I woke up without wondering whose problem I needed to solve before breakfast. I rented a small apartment on the north side of Austin with wide windows that faced a quiet park instead of a parking lot full of delivery trucks. Every morning, I carried a mug of coffee onto the little balcony and watched people walk their dogs before heading to work. Children rode bicycles, elderly couples held hands. Nobody knew my last name. Nobody cared about board meetings or executive titles. It was strangely beautiful. My mother came to visit the following weekend carrying 2 grocery bags and far more food than one person could possibly eat. She stepped inside, looked around the apartment, and smiled. "It feels peaceful." I laughed softly. "It feels small." She gently touched my arm. "Peace has never needed a large address." We spent the afternoon unpacking dishes and hanging framed photographs I had almost forgotten I owned. One picture showed the 2 of us standing outside my college graduation. Another captured us laughing beside a lake years before I met Ryan. Looking at those photographs reminded me that my life had existed long before I became someone's wife. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed one relationship to become the entire measure of my identity. That realization hurt, but it also set something free inside me. A few days later, my closest friend from college, Hannah, drove in from San Antonio. She arrived wearing blue jeans, carrying takeout barbecue, and pretending not to notice the moving boxes still stacked against the walls. "I brought enough brisket for emotional recovery," she announced with a grin. "I hear it works better than therapy." I laughed harder than I had in months. We ate dinner sitting on folding chairs because I had not yet bought a dining table. The conversation drifted away from lawyers, audits, and corporate politics. We talked about old professors, road trips, favorite books, and dreams we had quietly abandoned while becoming adults. At one point, Hannah looked at me across the room and asked, "If nobody expected anything from you, what would you build?" I started to answer immediately, then stopped. The silence that followed surprised both of us. I had spent so many years building someone else's future that I had forgotten to imagine my own. "I do not know," I admitted. Hannah smiled warmly. "Then maybe that is where your new life begins." Those words stayed with me long after she drove home. A week later, I rented a modest office inside a shared workspace near downtown Austin. It had 1 desk, 2 chairs, white walls, and a window overlooking a row of oak trees. There was no receptionist. No executive parking, no polished conference room, just possibility. I placed my old laptop on the desk, opened a blank notebook, and wrote a single sentence across the first page. Build something that leaves people stronger than you found them. It became the first promise I ever made entirely to myself. Around that time, I began receiving messages from people I had not spoken to in years: former coworkers, dispatch supervisors, software engineers, a warehouse manager from Oklahoma. None of them asked about the family conflict. Instead, they wrote things like, "Thank you for believing in us when nobody else did. You taught me more than any manager I ever worked for. If you ever build another team, I would be honored to work with you again." I read every message slowly. Success had always been described to me as numbers on financial statements or applause inside boardrooms. Yet these messages felt more valuable than either. They reminded me that the most lasting work we ever do often survives inside people rather than buildings. One quiet afternoon, I received another call from Richard. I answered without hesitation. His voice sounded steadier than before. "Emily, I wanted you to know something." "All right." The board completed its preliminary review. I listened quietly. There were many things I failed to see. "I know, I cannot change that." "No." He paused before continuing. "But I can admit it." There was no attempt to justify the past, no request for forgiveness, just an older man accepting responsibility for the limits of his own judgment. "Thank you," I said sincerely. Before ending the call, he surprised me. "Marcus told me you rented a small office." I smiled. "News travels fast." Richard let out a quiet laugh. "It does." Then he added something I never expected to hear. "Whatever you decide to build next, I hope nobody ever convinces you to stand in the background again." After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Those words did not erase what had happened. They were not meant to. Healing is not forgetting. Healing is reaching the place where yesterday no longer decides who you become tomorrow. That evening, I drove out to a hill overlooking Lake Travis just before sunset. Families spread blankets across the grass. Children chased one another with paper airplanes. A young couple taught their little daughter how to skip stones across the water. I watched them for nearly an hour without checking my phone once. The sky slowly turned shades of gold and deep orange. As the last light settled across the lake, I realized I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to tell me my value. It was a quieter victory than I once imagined. There were no cameras, no applause, no dramatic speeches, only a peaceful heart and a future that finally belonged to me. Just as I stood to leave, my phone vibrated with a new email. The sender was an investment firm based in Manhattan. The subject line contained only 8 simple words. "We would like to discuss your next company." Almost 2 years passed before I returned to New York, and when I stepped into the conference room overlooking Manhattan, I realized that the city looked different when you were no longer trying to prove your worth to someone else. The skyline stretched beyond the glass like a promise instead of a challenge. I carried the same old leather laptop bag that had left the Bennett house with me that unforgettable night. It was worn now. The handle had faded. The corners showed years of use. Yet somehow it remained the most valuable thing I owned, because it reminded me that I had walked away with something nobody else could purchase: knowledge, character, integrity. The meeting lasted most of the afternoon. Investors asked thoughtful questions. Engineers discussed future platforms. Market analysts examined long-term forecasts. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody answered on my behalf. Nobody suggested my ideas belonged to someone else. When the final documents were signed, one of the partners smiled warmly and reached across the table. "Congratulations, Emily. Based on today's agreement, the company is officially valued at $91 million. The room applauded. I smiled, thanked everyone sincerely, and quietly looked out the window for a moment. Surprisingly, I did not think about the money. I thought about my mother eating cold dinners after double nursing shifts. I thought about the tiny apartment where she taught me that dignity costs nothing but is worth everything. I thought about the hotel room in Austin where I had finally remembered who I was. Numbers change lives, but healing changes hearts. A few weeks later, I received one final invitation from Richard Bennett. He asked if I would meet him for coffee, nothing more. We chose a quiet cafe in Dallas, far away from the headquarters that had once shaped so much of my life. Richard looked older than I remembered. His shoulders seemed lighter somehow, as though truth, even painful truth, had removed a burden he had carried without realizing it. After we sat down, neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I spent too many years measuring people by who spoke the loudest." I smiled gently. "Many people do." He nodded. I confused confidence with character. I remained quiet. "Ryan resigned several months ago," he continued softly. "After the board completed its restructuring, he decided to leave the company." There was no anger in Richard's voice, only sadness. "Olivia accepted a position somewhere else," he added. "Most of the old leadership has moved on." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I hope they all find peace." Richard looked surprised. "You really mean that?" "Yes." He studied me for a long moment before asking, "You do not hate us?" I shook my head. "Hate keeps people connected to the very things they are trying to leave behind." He lowered his eyes. "I wish I had known you better." "You know me now," I answered. "That is enough." Before we stood to leave, Richard reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed something on the table between us. It was the old silver house key, the same one I had left behind that night. "The house was sold during the restructuring," he said quietly. "One of the staff found this in a drawer and thought you might want it." I looked at the key for several seconds before gently picking it up. It felt much lighter than I remembered. Perhaps because it no longer represented obligation. It was simply metal. Nothing more. Richard smiled sadly. "I finally understand something." "What is that?" "You never needed that house." I smiled back. "No." He nodded once. "You only needed someone to believe in you." I answered with complete honesty. In the end, I learned to become that person myself. We shook hands before walking in opposite directions. Neither of us looked back. Life has a quiet way of closing chapters without announcing the moment they end. Months later, my company launched a foundation that provided scholarships and mentorship for young women entering engineering, logistics, and technology. Every year, I visited the program personally. I always told the same story, although I never mentioned names. I simply told them that talent deserves protection, kindness is never weakness, and the loudest voice in the room is not always the one carrying the greatest wisdom. Sometimes a young student would stay after everyone else left, just to ask one more question. Those conversations became my favorite part of every year. My mother eventually retired from nursing. She filled her days with gardening, reading novels on the back porch, and reminding me to take weekends off. Hannah never stopped appearing with barbecue whenever she decided I was working too hard. Marcus became one of my closest advisors, and every Christmas he still mailed handwritten cards because, as he always said, some traditions should survive technology. As for me, success gradually became quieter. I no longer measured life through headlines or company valuations. I measured it through peaceful mornings, honest friendships, meaningful work, and the freedom to look into a mirror without apologizing for the person looking back. If you have listened this far, perhaps some part of this journey feels familiar. Maybe someone convinced you that your value depended on their approval. Maybe you have spent years making yourself smaller just to keep the peace. If that is true, I hope you remember something I learned far too late. Healthy love never asks you to disappear in order to belong. Healthy respect never requires you to surrender your voice. Protect your heart, protect your work, protect your financial independence. And above all, protect the quiet truth inside you that already knows who you are, even when nobody else seems willing to see it. If this story stayed with you, I would be grateful if you gently pressed the like button, subscribed to the channel, and shared your thoughts in the comments. I would truly love to hear where you are listening from and what part of this journey spoke most deeply to your heart, because every shared story reminds someone else that they are not walking alone. The lesson I carry with me is simple. Never allow another person's opinion to become the architect of your identity. Before I left the cafe that afternoon, I slipped the old silver house key into a small wooden memory box I keep in my office. It sits beside a blank notebook, and the first page that reads, "Build something that leaves people stronger than you found them." I have never used that key again. I never will, because the most important door I ever opened was not attached to a house. It was the one inside myself. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for spending your time with me today. If this story helped you feel seen, understood, or simply a little less alone, then every difficult step along my journey found a purpose far greater than I ever imagined.